Welcome to Be Well. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Jonathan from Your Why, and I'm grateful to have this opportunity to have these conversations with experts in their field related to living a mindful, vibrant life. Today's topic, timely, finding peace and joy this holiday season. When I think of mindfulness at this time of the holidays, I think it's something that we want to be able to explore in terms of how best to be present for our loved ones. And today we're going to explore that within the context of recognizing that what has been described as the single greatest public health threat, and that's being defined as adverse childhood experiences, or the acronym ACEs, childhood trauma. ACEs and toxic stress are at the forefront of the conversation right now. From the effects of the pandemic, such as virtual learning, to the spike in the coronavirus cases, everyday life has truly been disrupted. What's most important is to consider what our kids are going through, especially with the holidays approaching. We all remember growing up and the magic of those holidays. So today we're going to explore how best to bring that through. Our conversation is truly to support families in how to promote resiliency and offer something to look forward to these holidays. As we get started, I wanted to share that and make note of an important note. The Y is one of 4 organizations in San Diego to receive a grant from the California Surgeon General's office to work with pediatricians and families to address ACEs and toxic stress. Together with our partners at the American Academy of Pediatrics, CA3, the San Diego State University's Social Policy Institute, and our very own talented staff here at the Y. What we've done is developed expert commentary to guide families this holiday season. Today's guests are those contributing experts. We have Dr. Pradeep Gidwani, a pediatrician, community health leader focused on creating systemic solutions and changes to improve the lives of children and families. He is the co-chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics Committee on Adverse Childhood Experiences. We also have from the Y, Christine Cole, a licensed clinical social worker, a specialist in early childhood mental health, a clinical supervisor at the YMCA Child Care Resource Service. You also will recognize Christina Palme Gillan, a licensed marriage family therapist who was with us last spring presenting on another topic in mental health. She's a licensed marriage family therapist, a clinical innovation consultant with YMCA Youth and Family Services. So with the introductions and our topic out there, what I'd like to do is start with Dr. Gidwani. Some of us have not heard before of the acronym ACEs, or Adverse Childhood Experiences. So if we could, because our focus is on children and families, if you could give me an operating definition of what is adverse childhood experiences. And again, thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. And there's so much information that's come out. This was based on a groundbreaking study that was done here in San Diego by a physician who was running a preventative medicine program called, his name is Vincent Felitti. He's still around. He's a great person to talk with. He's a real interesting gentleman. And he found some concerns when he was talking with his patients. And so what he did was he worked with others to, at that time, and this is back in the late 90s, to put together a survey of folks to talk about what were things that happened with children early. And this was people remembering what happened. So we're talking about abuse, neglect, in factors like seeing your mother hurt or other kinds of things of someone being incarcerated, things that would impact children. And they were working on what they knew at the time. What Dr. Felitti found, and it's really groundbreaking, is that the more of these adverse childhood experiences you have, and his study included 10, and today I would say that there's more that we need to consider. Of those 10, the more you had of those experiences, the more impact there was to your health behaviors, your health risk-taking behaviors, but most importantly, what happened to your health. There was higher rates of heart disease, higher rates of cancer, higher rates of asthma, chronic lung conditions. So this is really a groundbreaking study that shows that early childhood experiences have lifelong impacts on our health and well-being. Now, that said, I don't want people to think, oh my gosh, I had these and it's my destiny. What we find is that if you have someone who's there and can help you in your relationships, there's ways to really bounce back and have resiliency. I know Christine will talk about that as we go through. But again, the importance is to remember that if you're triggered, and sometimes holidays can be a trigger, it's really important to look at those things and get help. And again, the help doesn't necessarily have to be mental health. It can be, but really supportive relationships are critical. And the way that I think about it is that the brain, the body, behavior, and relationships are all affected by what we call toxic stress. And there's three kinds of stress. There's a good stress. Remember when you're trying to learn how to drive a car, it's kind of stressful. Your feet, your hands, everything, you're like, I don't know what to do. Like today, it's so automatic. But when you started, there was stress. And so there's a good stress that helps us be more alert. Then there's something known as tolerable stress. And tolerable stress is that stress that you have that's temporary, and also that it's buffered by somebody who cares about you. And then the third one that we worry about is toxic stress. And the toxic stress is the stress that is unmitigated and you're not being supported. And that actually has impacts on our body in our nervous system, our immunological system, and our hormonal system. So we have an understanding of how that works. So that's a very, very quick overview of a lot of material and a lot of research. But the important part to know is it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. And we do not look at people and think that there's something wrong with them. We think there's things that happened early in their development that still impact them. And trauma from early childhood is important, but trauma later in life is also important. And I think what we really can do is kind of destigmatize this idea of trauma, because when we're traumatized, we feel isolated. And being isolated is exactly what makes it stick. And we want it to become unstuck. And that's where relationships come in.
That's excellent. Actually, you and I were talking a little bit earlier about the TED Talk by Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, and I thought it was just groundbreaking for someone like myself who's been in the field of mental health for many years. But to see her speak to it and some of the health effects across the lifetime, I thought was just stunning, that we were just coming to a greater realization of. And what was profound for me is that it's across all demographics. It's not
Absolutely.
specific to any particular demographic. I think one study had 70% Caucasian, 70% college educated, and profound impact in terms of on their health effects throughout their lifetime.
Yeah, and just picking up on that point, I think I did not mention that, but again, Dr. Felitti worked in the Kaiser system, and the Kaiser system is a relatively middle class to upper middle class insured working population that is more likely Caucasian, higher level, and particularly at that time. So again, you're right that that's an impact. But if we look at other communities, we can also see higher levels of this. So there's an urgency. And the talk that you spoke about, we call it the red dress talk because Nadine Burke-Harris is wearing a red dress. So if people go on and look her up or look up ACEs, you're right. It is an excellent TED Talk.
And Pradeep, I like how you spoke to the impact on the brain development. There was one example that she gave that really drove it home for me when she talked about the brain-body response. And all of us, she used the analogy of you're hiking in the forest and you see a bear. You go into flight or fight. You're either going to prepare to fight the bear or you're going to take off running.
Right.
She used the analogy with ACEs in terms of childhood trauma. It's like coming home every day, having that bear show up at your house, and just the exhausting, as you spoke to, that toxic stress. So Pradeep, you alluded to the benefit of relationships. So Christina, I'm going to come over to you. And I know you've done a lot of writing and research related to how the relationship can shift the environment and be a protective factor, maybe in the healing related to childhood trauma. And so if you will, speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm just really excited, for those of us who have known about ACEs and been studying and talking about ACEs, to really see this conversation be shifting to what can we do next is really exciting for me. And the fact that relationships are stabilizing, I think is a really important piece to be emphasizing, because when we think of treatments and preventions, right, a lot of times we think dollar signs. And the beauty of relationships is that they're free. So it's a no cost way to intervene. And so, relationships are protective, and they're also healing. So, when we think about young people, children, or young adults, these early relationships, and not just ending at 5 years old, but growing teens as well. These relationships are so important. And so when we know that there are stressors, toxic stress, levels in a family environment, it's really important to emphasize and help give skills to people and families, teachers, coaches. I think everybody's really needs to be in on this, to create warm, responsive relationships. Because that is what really helps decrease our physiologic response, right? It's not a bear. It feels like the bear, but it's not the bear. So let my, nervous system help calm down your nervous system, so that we can, we can soothe, but also then, do whatever things need to happen next, whether it's problem solving or learning, or connecting and engaging. We have to be calmed. So, some of the work that we've done here in the Y really over the past 5 years, heavily around our concept of cave, which is what we spoke about in the spring, I think really comes in handy here, because these concepts of compassion, awareness, acceptance, validation, and empowerment are really sort of a simple package to be able to guide people into what a warm and responsive relationship is. So when the relationship has compassion and awareness, and that sort of attunement to be able to read another person, we can then validate, which is really the one aspect that will really help bring down that physiologic arousal. It all just comes together really nicely to be able to help young people and adults, because like Pradeep said, this doesn't end at 18. This is lifelong, and the health consequences are really difficult for people to cope with in adulthood, and they're quite expensive, to be honest. So
Christina, I know in the chat there's the resource of an article that you put together, Cultivating Awareness and Acceptance During the Holiday Season. It's an excellent resource with some wonderful suggestions, so I appreciate you bringing that through. Through the Y, how would some of our families and members access some support related to CAVE?
We have a web page on our, it's a page within the Youth and Family Services website. And there's links there to be able to contact us. We have a counseling center, which is really up and running quite heavily these days. And we have a lot of clinicians, that are available to be of service to people. In a bigger sense, if people want, we also offer CAVE trainings to folks, to organizations, to businesses as well. So I can't say there's one single way, because we'll kind of make it happen. If someone's interested, we'll find a way to meet their need.
That's fantastic. And I'm aware that some of those services are being offered virtually as well at this time.
Absolutely. We pivoted, and we're going to keep going with it.
Fantastic. So next up, Christine Cole, who is a specialist in infant and early childhood. So what can you offer from the get-go that we might be able to do in terms of either parenting or recognizing early on, so that we can be bringing through protective factors to support our family from the very earliest stages?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Jonathan. I think, I just want to echo a little bit of what Pradeep and Christina have already hit on, that, when we think about different types of stress, even our littlest ones go through those 3 different types of stress. And so when we think about positive stress, which helps us to grow and learn, which is super important in those early years, up to toxic stress, which is the one that has a negative impact and that we're worried about those health outcomes, that middle region of the tolerable stress is really about buffering relationships, like Christina's talking about. And that's throughout the lifespan, but it even begins early on in 0 to 5. And when I think about, talking to parents and families, and even, our child care providers and teachers, Christina touched on coaches, like everyone can do this. It really is simmering it down to basic like consistency, predictability, and responsiveness. And so when I say those things, I think it sounds scary for folks, but I say things like, do you have a regular routine? Do you have a consistent way that you respond when behaviors are happening? And not to judge, there's lots of parenting resources out there that are like, you're supposed to do parenting practices this way. And there's for sure ones that I wouldn't recommend. And in general, like, are you being consistent so this kiddo knows what to expect and that you're going to be a certain way, so that they can feel safe and know what's going on in their environment? And then Christina already touched on this, the responsiveness, right? And so how are we responding when, our little one is having a meltdown or when they're feeling sad? And so it's those little moments that actually have such a huge impact. Pradeep can do such a better job speaking to this than I can, but Dr. Bruce Perry talks about how in those early years, moments are more significant than like years in our adult life. And so those little moments of just connecting with your kiddo can really make such a huge difference, even when there's a pandemic going on and there's lots of stress.
Right, Christine, I really appreciate the emphasis on moments, because as a parent myself, it also is reassuring that we're not going to be perfect, and always an opportunity to seize a moment to get it right. And I also want to point to that there is a blog that you've put together, and it's also in the chat, 5 ways to use protective factors during the holidays. And there's some excellent tips in there. So I thank you for offering that as well. I want to pitch it out to all of you at this point, and we're going to shift in a moment into the holidays, but any other protective factors that we should be discussing and bringing through that are supportive at this point in time?
Well, I think, Christine kind of talked a little bit about, both Christines talked about the fact that one of those factors is parent resiliency. And so what does that really mean? So parent resiliency is that ability to quote unquote bounce back. But I think what's more important than that is that for a parent to be able to regulate. So that whole thing of like being able, I use the metaphor of the car, and there's an accelerator, a brake, a gauge, all that's like the ways that we regulate ourselves and the way that we kind of control how we respond. And it's a complex process. So again, it's a funny word, but really the idea of how do we do that? And Christine talked about how, as a parent, you have to help regulate your child. So if a child is having a meltdown, you don't want to have a meltdown. You want to just be able to stay present and hold that space. And, Jonathon, the part about moments, I'm glad you picked up on that, because again, we always talk about how parents need to be attuned with their child, in sync with their child. But we're only in sync with our child at 30%, 40%. That's still good. It's not 100%. And it's not just the connection, but when the connection is broken or there's a rupture, the more important part is the repair. How do you reconnect? And so we're in the process of connecting, disconnecting, reconnecting all of the time. So when you can connect with your child in that gentle way and help them with their own emotions and their thoughts and their feelings, that's an important skill that's lifelong.
That's fantastic. And I just want to, put out to our those that are viewing the conversation, if there's any particular questions you have that we can help meet your needs. We're very fortunate to have these experts here on call to answer any question that comes up. So I really appreciate that. So holidays. So how do we create, obviously this is going to be a very different holiday and different from the lens of mindfulness. You kind of take whatever you have and you greet that because it's going to be different the next time around. So this holiday, what are the suggestions to create holiday traditions in the environment that we're in?
Yeah, I think just to jump on what Pradeep was talking about rupture and repair and about, our own regulation. I know I was just talking with some of my team members today about reminding that we also need that regulation and need that support in calming us down. And so social connections is another protective factor that I think is so important when we think about this holiday season. I've heard a lot that folks are like, it's just not the same. I can't see my family. I can't go places. And so really thinking creatively around like, what are the ways that you can connect with folks, even though it might not be the same as it has been in the past. And so, I think we talk a lot about like Zoom parties and things like that. I also know for some people that's like really overwhelming and feels like intense being on the screen. And so like are there ways that you can like write cards? Are there phone calls that you can have? Are there ways that you can, I love seeing the posts during this whole pandemic of folks, being outside a window and talking to someone and still getting that face-to-face connection, but in a safe way that we can make sure that we're reducing the spread. But just like our kiddos are needing that connection and someone to kind of like listen and hear them and be with them, we need that as adults too. That doesn't ever go away. Like Christina highlighted, like adolescents need it, children need it, us grownups need it. And so really fostering those connections, even though traditions might look a little different this year.
Fantastic. Great ideas, Christine.
This holiday season, obviously things look very different, and I kind of keep getting pulled back to this idea of curiosity and having this sort of culture of curiosity. And I think that it's a really valuable thing to be discussing with families and with children, because even very young children can, they're so naturally curious that it's not something that's out of reach for them. So being curious about what we can do differently this year. I know, for instance, families have, meals, traditional meals that they rely on every year. And so rather than, we can miss those and be sad about that. And we can also, try something new so that you're validating what we can't have in that bit of loss that we're all experiencing, and also sort of, acting opposite and trying something new at the same time. And I think it's a really lovely way for families to bond over new and over, this opportunity to, for kids to have a say in creating new traditions.
That's
and
fantastic.
That little bit of empowerment.
I love what you're saying. I appreciate that you're validating the experience, because there is that loss of what the holiday will be like this year. Typically for our family, Christmas Eve is a big event. We bring lots of families together, some that don't celebrate the holiday, and we incorporate them into it. And so it's going to be different this year. But I love that you acknowledge, okay, you can have the sadness, you can have the array of feelings that go with that, but then also open up to curiosity. So this is what it is. And so to be curious in a fresh way, what can the holiday be like this year? I love that. And to engage the family in it. As a parent, you don't have to bear the whole responsibility to bring it through, but to engage so you get a sense of what would be meaningful.
Absolutely. Share the love, share the responsibility.
And what I love about what Christina's highlighting is, I think when we think about social emotional competence, which is another protective factor that builds, resilience for us, I think we think of social skills and then we think of dysregulation, right? Like out of control emotions that we need to learn how to like manage in the moment. But emotional competence is also about like just recognizing feelings and being able to hold that there might be multiple feelings at one time. I talk to parents and kids about like, it's like you get to go to the ice cream shop and you get to scoop all of them. You don't just have to have one flavor. Like we can have them all in the bowl at one time, and we might like one flavor better than the other, but they all like are equally good and delicious and all that good stuff. And so emotional competence is exactly what Christina's hitting on, of just like giving space for all of the feelings and being able to talk about them and recognize them. And that really is helping the kiddos in developing, but it's also helping us as adults, because not all of us had that growing up. And so we're practicing those skills and helping with our own healing and resilience as well.
Yeah, I would actually capture what Christina said as really giving kids voice and choice, right? You want to hear what they have to say, and you want to see how they can contribute to a new tradition. So, wow, that's really empowering. And as Christine mentioned, that many of us didn't have that when we were kids. We were kind of told to feel this way or shake it off or do that. So again, validating their feelings is so important. And I think the part that's really wonderful too is to let parents actually know they need to take time for themselves. They need to have that opportunity to say, it's okay for you to take time for yourself so that you can be more present with your child. Because listen, we're all under a lot of stress right now. And I think it's just important to acknowledge that we all need a little bit of way of recharging. Some things people talk about are like a little cup of tea or a walk or this. Now, I'm a huge advocate of walking, and particularly when you can walk with a person you really care about. Then you have two things that are helping you, right? There's the walking, which is very regulating, and there's a rhythm to it. But the other part is that we also can regulate through relationships, and we've all been talking about that. Like that's another way to regulate. So you get kind of a two opportunity if you get to walk together with somebody and have a conversation, but also just making sure you have time for yourself and asking what recharges me, what gives me energy, what helps me so that I can be there for my child. And I just love the idea of new traditions and reframing things while still acknowledging the losses. And we've been talking a lot in our programs about losses. And the issue is that we just have had loss upon loss. And right now, with the being, in this mode of lockdown, it adds pressure to things. And so again, I think just acknowledging what's happening and giving space for it and allowing people to be sad and be able to feel the grief, but then be able to move forward. And so again, I just think we have to think about what's practical for families. And again, we can keep offering more ideas. This is my two colleagues here have such wonderful ideas.
You guys are obviously very talented, resourceful, and your tips are right on. And I also just, the idea of voice and choice is a profound one for us to hold on to. I received something from yourselves regarding the new holiday traditions and new possibilities and low risk holiday activities and also the coping with holiday stress. Is that a handout that's available somewhere? Maybe JG has that, but it was an excellent resource. I know it is something through ACE's aware program. So if someone's interested in that, we can put that out. But any other specific tangible holiday ideas? We provided a great framework in terms of how to go about it, some tangible ideas. Any others that are important that you want to bring through at this time?
I think I'll just add one more that I know I mentioned, that it's good for kiddos to have consistency and predictability. That doesn't go away in the holidays. And we as adults also need that. And it doesn't go away in the holidays. And I think that it's very common and easy for us to kind of get a little loose in our routine, which is totally fine. We can do that. And like, what are the ways that we can offer some consistency in our routine and schedule? And so for really little ones, well, even for teens, I think about like, how can we make sleeping and eating? Because those ones are pretty key and our body responds to those ones. It helps with our internal regulation. How can we keep those at the same time, even if we're not doing school, we're not doing distance learning, right? Or we're not necessarily doing our regular things that the way that we would, but what are the anchors that we can bring ourselves back to so that our body and our brain still have some sense of predictability, which really, like, when we translate it into like the science of it, is it's I'm safe. I know what to expect. Things are the same. And so, for us adults, like, how can we make sure we're still like getting that time, that one-on-one time with ourselves, like Pradeep was talking about, at the same time? Like, where are the places that we can ground ourselves in some consistent routines? It sounds really simple and basic, and that's why I love recommending it, because like, we can't control a lot that's happening in the world, but I can control if I go and stop and get a snack during this time of the day. And so I just think that's a nice, easy one that we can always put into place.
So I'll throw in a little bit about breathing, because I think breathing is so important, and really breathing is the connection between the mind and the body. And I think, giving parents concrete tools. So like, even with a little one, you can draw on a piece of paper, a flower on one side of the paper and a candle on the other side of the paper, right? And so with the flower, you say, smell the flower. So the little one just goes down and smells the flower. And they're so great with using their imagination. They breathe in, and then you flip the page over, you say, blow out the candle. Well, you just taught your child how to do a breathing exercise. There's also, as they get older, like you can do, a belly breath and a balloon breath. You can have them put their hands up and like, kind of like if they're creating a hot air balloon, and that they're, floating away. And so there's just different ways, and there's tips on the internet that are there. I know that we've done some for ACEs Aware. In fact, that one I just shared, we shared an ACEs Aware webinar. But I think the important part is if you can take a look at your breathing, you have a feeling of how your mind is doing. And it's actually said that our emotions correlate with our breath. And if we pay attention to our breath and our emotions, we really can understand what's going on inside us that might be under our radar. And I think that's such an important piece of finding time just to pay attention to your breath, allow it to relax. You don't have to control it. You just watch it. And there's just many ways to do that. So breathing and teaching kids how to breathe and how to be aware of their breath is a great, like, really practical tool.
Pradeep, that's excellent. As an aside, last Thursday's Be Well was about breath. And so
Perfect.
I appreciate you reinforcing that. And some of the conversation was about, as we take on stress, we forget to breathe. And think about food and water, certain things that you can go without for a great period of time. Breathing, you can't. But when we're under stress, our breathing often becomes very shallow. And so the mindfulness of that deep breathing, and I love the example of the flower and the candle. That's fantastic to do as a family.
Yeah, and it's actually said that fear is excitement without a breath.
Mm.
And so when we get excited and there's something new, if we're breathing, then we have our level of excitement goes up, and kind of our enjoyment and our anticipation goes up. But when we're not breathing and it's something new, our kind of fear goes up, and we kind of lose the excitement of that novel experience.
Pradeep, you're full of the one-liners today. I love it.
So we're going to close in just a moment. What I want to do is offer the opportunity, if there's any from the conversation we've had today, if you are empowering families to take one step, one action step, taking away from today, what might that be? And I'll give you each an opportunity to pull that one forward.
So I'm happy to jump right in. So what I would really tell parents to do is, in those moments that we talked about of taking time for yourself, is think about your strengths. Focus on your strengths. Focus on what you do well. Focus on how you are a really great parent, how much you love your child, how much you want the best for your child, what you value for your child. If you could stop in the day and take a minute 3 times a day, just 3 times a day for a minute at a time, and just appreciate your own strengths and your own goodness, it gives you a lot of room for when stress comes. So that's the thing is take in your own good, remember your own good, and focus on your own strengths, because you have so many strengths and you are doing your best as a parent. And that's what your child needs, is you knowing that you're doing your best.
Thank you, Pradeep.
I'll piggyback off of that because I like that a lot. And if we can do that for ourselves as parents, I suggest taking the opportunity to then extend that to our children, because they are doing so well right now. Even when they melt down on us or they get frustrated, they are handling this experience with such grace. And I certainly hope that they are getting that positive reinforcement and all of those reminders that their effort is noticed and that it's appreciated. So I suggest sharing that with them as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Christina.
Yeah, just to kind of combine the two of those, just going back to what I said in the beginning around those moments. So really just like appreciating those moments when you as a parent or caregiver are doing your best, and that you're recognizing your kiddo trying to do their best and just being in those moments. So just taking the opportunity to practice that mindfulness of being present when we're with our kiddos, and just appreciating that, because those moments make a huge impact later on.
Thank you, Christine. Those are wonderful action steps things to be mindful of stepping forward from today. I was putting some holiday ornaments out last night, and one of them, you push the hand and it says something. And what it spoke was, the magic of the holiday lies in your heart. And so my action step would be that we find moments to express our heart with those that we love. So thank you all. Dr. Pradeep Gidwani, thank you. Christina Halme-Galan, Christine Cole, very, very fortunate to have yourselves offer your expert advice and guidance. So thank you, and I wish you all a wonderful holiday. And our viewers, thank you for being with us. And until our next time, please be well. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Happy holidays.